And we're live. What's up? I hope y'all like that cool little intro we just put together. Welcome to the Great Debate. First ever round table session. Similar to what we normally do, but not 2, not 3, not 5, but 10 Jews and Palestinians. Let's see what happens. You know, this is new for us all. It's going to be an experiment. A few little reminders. First of all, if this is your first time here, subscribe. We do this every week. Not always this, but always awesome conversations. If you really like what we do, we have a Patreon that we just opened. Support us. It helps us make more awesome content. Sorry, there's a cockroach that just ran past me, distracted me. Hey, friend, the door's that way. And at the end of this, as always, we're going to do an after party in Discord. For those unfamiliar with Discord, I won't tell you more about it. Click the link and find out. It's awesome. It's kind of like a voice chat like this, but more interactive. Everyone can join and contribute their thoughts and ideas. I will be stepping down as the moderator. This conversation will not have a moderator. So these are my last words moderating. And without further ado, our awesome guests will go around in a little circle and everyone will give a quick introduction and then we'll just get to chatting. Take it like to the right of me. So Faraj, all you, man.
So, hey, how's it going, guys? This is my third time being hosted by Adar. I am a grad student at Brooklyn College in childhood education, bilingual education. And I am looking forward to having some conversations over here.
Hi, my name is Danny. I'm from Israel, originally from LA. I have my MA and my BA in International Relations and Middle Eastern History and Political Science. My first time on this live debate, and I'm really excited just to see what happens.
Hey guys, so it's Iyad from Jerusalem, raised up in Hebron, and I live in London at the moment. I'm a computer scientist. That's what I learned, but that's not what I do. And I just run a small startup.
Awesome.
So I'm Rebecca. I am based in the New York City area. I studied biology and computer science. Right now, I'm doing a lot of freelance writing. I also am very active on social media, where I maintain an Israel-Palestine peace forum on Quora.com. Now it is growing into other platforms. It has almost 1 million views, and you can check it out. It's called Unity is Strength.
And hi, I'm Jason. This is my third appearance on Adar's channel. I'm born in New York, but raised in Perth, Australia, which is where I currently am, and of Palestinian Christian heritage. I run my own renewable energy company, selling solar energy systems to residential and commercial properties here. And I'm also very passionate about embracing dialogue between Israelis and Palestinians to learn each other's narratives and to build a strong narrative of reconciliation.
All right, I'm Thomas Resnick. This is my first time on the Great Debate. I would describe myself as a writer, a Jew booker, and I'm the founder of a group called Jews Against War with Iran, which unfortunately right now only exists on social media, but we are trying to get some in-person stuff off the ground as well. And yeah, I'm very grateful to be here.
Hi guys, my name's Yoshua or Joshua, originally from Denver, Colorado. I'm an Israeli now. I've been living in Jerusalem now, with Israel for 9 years. I served as a combat engineer with the Israeli Defense Force. I'm a veteran of Operation Protective Edge. I used to work in the Muslim quarter of the old city of Jerusalem, serving as a guarding Jewish homes there. And I also studied for 2 years towards a degree in Islam and Middle Eastern Studies at Hebrew University, and I currently run a marketing firm.
Hey guys, my name's Tarek. I'm an Australian Palestinian, and yeah, I'm an entrepreneur. I have a business here in Australia. Not very exciting with Corona and stuff. And I split my time between Melbourne and Jerusalem, and to a lesser extent, Hebron.
Awesome. Now what?
Okay, so wait, everyone introduce themselves. So basically, I'd like to ask the first question, if I may, on a note that Jason said about his passion for learning different narratives. So I think that we can all agree the difference in our narratives, in the Jewish and Palestinian narrative, is one of the biggest barriers for any path of reconciliation. And I think an interesting topic to talk about would be how Palestinian and Jews view Hamas as a democratically elected government. Jews feel a type of way about Hamas, and the Palestinian civilians who voted for Hamas. And I'm sure on the Palestinian end, it makes you feel other types of ways. So if anyone would like to answer that question.
Well, I can say that like what comes out of a place sort of is reflective of the unique challenges that society has sort of had to face, and which is reflected as to what we have now with the people electing Hamas in that way. So I think that is very representative of people in Gaza, since they were the only people that voted. Myself in the diaspora, also Faraj and Tariq wouldn't have voted for them. I'll let them speak for themselves, but I'm certainly I'm not a supporter of Hamas in regards to their militant struggle or guerrilla warfare tactics, and that should be condemned. And I certainly don't feel they reflect many of our values, only that certain segment that is living within Gaza and few people that sort of sympathize with them.
What values do they symbolize that Palestinians resonate with? In your opinion, or from someone you know personally?
Sorry, could you repeat that again? I think I didn't catch.
Oh no.
In the
Can you hear
meantime,
me,
I'm
though?
pulling up Muhammad from our audience gives an interesting explanation. The formula is simple. They got elected by all other votes split due to many nominee while they had one each sector. Now, why they elected them?
That's very true in the West Bank. That's very true in the West Bank. The Palestinian Authority is very divided during the election. While Hamas would run one candidate, I'm pretty sure, per locality. And so it's a complex situation. Hamas did win the election, but it's not as clear-cut as people think. And I'm sorry for jumping in, by the way. Sorry, I know. So I can let him answer.
I've heard it's also. I've heard it's also in relation to. I've heard from people that it's that Fatah was. It's not. I mean, the element of anti-Israel and Jews and all does play into it, but a major component was the corruption in the PLO that pushed a lot of people towards the Hamas.
Hamas is known for its charity. So put it this way: Hamas now is not Hamas before the election. Hamas was known. People from Hamas were never associated with corruption at all. While I'm not going to say that the Palestinian Authority was, but everyone knows the reputation of the Palestinian Authority. Everyone knows this. And so if Hamas is known as a religious organization, religious people, I know maybe Jews don't feel this. I don't know how it is in the Jewish community, in the Palestinian community. Religious people are people you can leave money with. Religious people are people that you can go to for advice. And that's what Hamas was. while the Palestinian Authority came from outside. Many of them were refugees from outside the country who had returned. Many of the people of Hamas were refugees inside Gaza, inside the West Bank. They understood the occupation. They understood many of the issues which Palestinians on the ground faced. While unfortunately, Fatah, a lot of them were from outside as well. So Hamas was became an organic movement in a lot of ways. And to be honest with you, I think a lot of people who voted with them, let me know if I'm speaking too fast, by the way. A lot of the people that voted for Hamas, to be honest, it was just a protest vote or a one-time thing. As in, there's a two-party system. One party was in charge from like 96, I think, or off the top of my head, 94. Hamas was the complete opposite of them. So, yeah.
I just wanted to say that, like going back to Hamas, it's important to realize that like Hamas didn't happen in a vacuum. It kind of happened. It kind of like rose into prominence and like sort of like political like Islamism became a like contentious movement when like a lot of Arab countries basically got disillusioned with Arab nationalism. And so like to answer Danny's question of like what kind of principles does Hamas represent to the everyday Palestinian, to be fair, it's revolutionary struggle, very similar to anti-colonial movements in the past, whether it's in Cuba or in like South America and so forth. So that's what that's how they represent, and that's why like you'll find many even Christians that do support Hamas. I don't want to support Jabhat Sha'biya, which is the PFLP, because they're atheists and they think that like, oh, Hamas, they're like, at least they believe in God, so like they can trust their eggs in their basket. It obviously doesn't obviously what Hamas painted itself as isn't exactly what it is now, and so it's just like kind of stuck with it. But yeah, so like I don't know. I hope that answers the question, the general question.
I mean, I also
reminds me.
Well, I was gonna add something, but if you want to move on, that's fine.
No, go ahead, Tom.
No, I was just gonna say I think just drawing what Muhammad said, that Hamas did not develop out of a vacuum. To my understanding, it was originally an affiliate of the Muslim Brotherhood in the Gaza Strip, and for a while, it was founded in the 60s or 70s, I believe. And believe it or not, at the time it was actually peaceful. The Israeli government kind of like not quite supported them, but like I guess covertly. Well, I guess you could say like they did support them in like a covert sense because
they encouraged Hamas mocks.
Yeah, they saw them as a way to draw them away from the more sort of secular militant Fedayeen, and it was really only like around the first Intifada when they were like, oh crap, this isn't good. Like, what have we done now? And I'm not saying Israel created Hamas, but I think that's something that does often go overlooked. That in its early years, the Israeli government did kind of look the other way, and now it's like, oh, we have this huge problem with Hamas. And it's like, well, that's kind of an important part.
It's funny that you say that, Tom, because one of the reasons that the strategy of Israel is to sustain but weaken the enemy and not demolish the enemy is because of exactly what you're talking about. It completely changed Israel's strategy, like and the way she looks at the world and terrorist groups. So, I mean, I know that I'm sorry, that was really wrong for me to say. It's just a lot of times Israelis look at Hamas as a terrorist group instead of a democratic elected party, just because of their actions, to say the least, the way that they attack Israel, and also the way they attack Palestinian civilians. And that's actually something I wanted to ask. So what we see, and when I say we, it's Israeli media, is that Hamas blatantly attacks Palestinian civilians who go against the Hamas. I've personally seen videos where Hamas has raided weddings and just assassin created like everyone there. And that's for a person, not even Israeli Palestinian. As a person, it's really hard to witness and see that those things go on. So is that something people are aware of? Is it something that it's true? Has it been manipulated in media?
I want Iyad to talk, but like before that, I just want to say that there's this kind of like tug of war happening in the West Bank and in Gaza where in the West Bank, Fatah is arresting anyone that's associated with Hamas, and in Gaza, Hamas is arresting anyone associated with Fatah. And so there's it's a kind of like game they're trying to play to like maintain their positions of power. And so like I don't know if that like sheds more light, but yeah, that's basically what's going on for the most part.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean,
Sorry,
just no worries. Just a quick point about the election of Hamas. Obviously, just wanted to add that Hamas actually won just mainly because the peace process was not successful. A lot of the West Bankers, a lot of the Gazans looked at the negotiation process and said, okay, this has got us nothing. And Hamas have always, and in general in the Arab world, the Muslim Brotherhood have always kind of positioned themselves as the opposition. And obviously, the majority of the Palestinians chose Hamas mainly because it was the opposition of a route that wasn't successful, and secondly because of the corruption in Fatah during that period.
I mean, I think it's important to note, though, that I feel like we're talking about Hamas as though, like, oh, they're just the opposition to Fatah and that. When it's important to remember, you know, they are a brutal Islamist dictatorship organization. They share common ancestors in Abdullah Azam Yusuf with Al Qaeda, who founded Al Qaeda, and he was also a major theologian for Hamas. So we have to remember that Hamas are not good people. I mean, the structure, the heads of the organization. I'm not talking about people on the ground who may have voted for them. That's a different conversation.
Right, but like from what I'm understanding, there is no other option. Hamas represents the opposite of everything that they experienced until the election of Hamas. Kind of like when Trump was elected, and I don't mean to sound crude or parallel or make that distinction, but when you are in a position when you're like, it's the lesser of, you're choosing the lesser of two evils, right? It doesn't mean that they're good, and I don't think that most Palestinians, again, I don't want to talk for the Palestinians, so correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think they would condone the actions, the humanitarian actions against Hamas, like what Hamas does to other people.
Well, the other thing too is that when people are religious and in government, then their religiosity may often become public image more than it is actual practice. If it is, well, that's actually what Machiavelli said, that a leader, to be effective, needs to present themselves as religious, but in reality, be willing to do what it takes, regardless of what the religion dictates. So whether people are religious in their personal lives is kind of different from how they express their values in running a country and being incentivized to show that they're religious in their personal lives doesn't necessarily filter for the right kind of people with respect to expressing their values in terms of how they run a country.
Yeah,
I was just going to quickly throw in. Look, Hamas is an Islamist organization, and it does represent an important demographic of Palestine, rightly or wrongly. A lot of Palestinians are quite religious. They're going to want some form of religious influence in the government. As for the actions, the asymmetrical warfare, terrorism, call it whatever you want. Yeah, most of us, we don't want anything to do with that. But unfortunately, Hamas is an important part of the Palestinian political makeup, just like other groups. Now, we ideally it wouldn't be the case, but it is, as Muhammad said, or Iyad said, sorry, due to the failure of negotiations. And so it's something where, like, yes, for example, someone like Joshua said that there's connections to the Muslim Brotherhood, stuff like that. Yeah. But there is more nuance to it. As in, yes, they do A, B, and C. But the thing is, why would people support them?
I said Al Qaeda, to be clear, not the Muslim Brotherhood. Muslim Brotherhood too, but they have deep
Not
connections.
Muslim Brotherhood.
Well,
Hamas is an offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood. It is directly an offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood.
Definitely.
Can I just jump in for a second? And I mean, I'm sure most people probably know this, but maybe some viewers don't. But like, there's this sort of attempt to, I feel like, speak of Hamas and to a lesser extent Hezbollah, but that's a different topic. Hamas and Al Qaeda and ISIS in the same breath, and like they're really not comparable because, like, you know, I don't support Hamas or anything, but they are like a nationalist movement, and to my understanding, like all of their attacks have either been in Israel or the occupied territories. Whereas Al Qaeda is kind of like all like, you know, like yes, and you know they're Islamists, and I don't agree with Islamism, but you know they have like their own sort of wheelhouse. Whereas Al Qaeda and ISIS are this sort of like global. They want this like global caliphate. So you know, I don't know if they're quite like, yes, there's similarities, but it's not. They're not. I don't think they're part of the same international terror network that, you know, has sort of captured a lot of the attention of anti-terror analysts.
I absolutely agree with Tom, and I think it's the only thing that Al Qaeda, ISIS, and Hamas have in common is probably Islam in one vague connection or another. And even like if you look at like if like I said, like I hope we agree that like Hamas is an offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood. Even if you look at the history of the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, why these things happen, people don't like wake up one time and say, let me pick up a Quran and find the things that make me want to kill people, or like say something like that. That stuff doesn't happen. You find things that already confirm the bias of like, oh, I want to go do some bad things. The people like the founders of the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt stemmed from seeing like British people, colonialists, on the Suez Canal building nice houses in their own land. And that was basically the history of why Muslim Brotherhood became such an important thing. Saying like, listen, we gotta gather around our identity, our Arab Muslim identity, and try to drive out this British, try to drive out the British. In the same way, like no one, like Israel doesn't just, like Jews don't wake up one day and say, oh, let me just move to this weird part of the Middle East that we have historical connections to. There has to be some sort of driving force to give people that extra stuff to actually take action and move and do things. So yeah, I hope that gives more clarity.
Right, but isn't there a limit to their actions? I mean, isn't there a limit to what's okay and not okay?
No, absolutely. Listen, I'm not gonna sit here and defend like, oh, like rockets for civilians or killing innocent people. Like, no, like that goes without saying that I think that stuff's important and like should not ever be a part of any like legitimate discussion about the topic. But at the same time, it's just that it's important to realize why these things happen and what situation causes these things to happen, if that makes sense. You know?
Right, but let's give a scenario where Israel one day wakes up, okay, and says, we did you wrong. We really and genuinely want a solution, okay? Would Hamas in a Palestinian state, or if there was a one-state solution, in a scenario where there is peace, okay? And there is self-determination for two nations. Does Hamas continue to be a militant political group?
Well, you look at examples from around the world, like let's say the IRA after the Good Friday Agreement happened. You know, as soon as some agreement happened, whether it's the Tamil Tigers, even they dropped their arms struggle, and when an agreement was reached. Like the thing is that if you remove the conflict, you remove the radicalism, and I think, although we're not going to solve it through this chat, but it does help in terms of gaining understanding and in regards to solving this issue so that there is no reason for someone to become radicalized. Now, the thing with Gaza, from what I understand, the majority of the people there are internally displaced from cities that are now in Israel. And really the root of this whole conflict is about numbers. Like the Palestinians are a people that were once a 92% majority of the land at the time of the Balfour Declaration, and in order for Israel to be Israel, it could not happen with an 8% Jewish minority. You could not rule over a 92% Arab majority. And so therefore the demographics of the land had to be reversed in order to create a stable basis for a Jewish country. And so this is what we have been through as Palestinians. We have been in cities that we have lived in for centuries as a multi-ethnic, multi-religious society, as the dominant majority of the land being reduced into a minority. And nobody likes being reduced into a minority because it will raise all sorts of questions about your legal status and who's representing you, whether you're an African American in Louisiana or Aborigine in Australia or a Maori in New Zealand. This is something which I think a lot of us don't know how to explain in terms of when we talk about our Palestinian narrative, what we have been through. A lot of people try to make it about religion or make it about something when really it's like trying to answer a mathematical equation using English literature. The whole thing is about numbers. Now it's about how can we preserve, because I personally don't believe the answer to being demographically reversed is to reverse the demographics back. No, we have to call it. We have to call it, and whether it's going to be a one state with two separate territories where these people can have some sort of legal representation. I mean, like the main objective now is to end to end the living under military rule. Because I think where Palestinians are probably the only people that if a Palestinian does something, he will go to a military court, not a civilian court. And so that in that essence lies the root of the problem. It's not the thing that we have to solve now. It's not about land. It's about legal status, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I want to touch on something because I feel like this is hinting at a larger theme that I've noticed that is very relevant to conflict resolution. It seems like we often have a distorted view of our opposition, and I see this manifest in a few ways. Firstly, we often view the most extreme in our opposition and we attribute those qualities to the whole. So, for example, Israelis will see terrorists and they'll conclude that Palestinians are terrorists, or Palestinians will be abused by, let's say, a soldier, and they'll come to the conclusion that Israelis are all oppressors. And similarly, in the United States, you could see Republicans are all racist, Democrats are all Antifa and looters and rioters, right? We take the most extreme in a group and we attribute that to the entire group. So that really gives us a distorted view. And how that really touches to what we're saying now, I actually see something similar when it comes to how we perceive the votes of our opposition. So, sometimes what we dislike the most in some political party is not the same reasons why people are voting for that party. So when we view Hamas, we say, okay, well, they want to kill us. Gazans voted for Hamas. That means Gazans want to kill us, right? That's the conclusion that many Israelis reach. But if you ask Gazans why they voted for Hamas, as we've already seen in this conversation, there's many other reasons, security, social issues. And this holds true also in the United States, right? The critique on Trump is that he's a pathological liar, he's a racist, look how he acts. But that's not why Republicans vote for Trump. It's for completely other reasons. So, I think that the solution to this distortion we have of our opposition is to get to know the opposition, right? It's to not let the media tell us who our opposition is and what they're like and what they value. And to not let the most extreme in a group dictate to us what the opposition is. So the solution it really comes down to the humanization of the other. And I think that's a theme that we're hinting at right here.
Well, also in terms of humanization of the other, you have to sort of leave yourself open. You have to somehow feel like your own social network, your own community is smaller than you would like it to be, to the point where you are willing to expand your view of what your own social network, what your own community could be. Now, this can happen for a lot of reasons in a lot of ways. In my case, one of the things here is that my own community, liberal Judaism and the diaspora, is really changing. It's very much in flux. It has a lot of people leaving. It should have more people coming in, I think. And we definitely seem to need fundamentally new paradigms in order to survive and truly be a moral force as a community. So one of the things that Palestinians have a very strong connection to the land of Israel. They have very deep roots there, and they have a very powerful, cohesive society. So being in a community where one of our concerns is apathy, and at the same time, we practically hold a bunch of the keys. I think that there's a very interesting fit here.
I just want to go back and say one thing about Hamas, and then let's continue the conversation, because I feel that in some way we're starting to equate Donald Trump and Hamas, and to make Hamas sound like they're a legitimate opposition movement that Israel at some point can work with, when they're not. When I think they, as Tom said,
they are working together now.
To a level,
they work together now.
To a level, they do, and I think it's a mistake, a huge mistake that Israel does, that they don't go in there. They need to crush Hamas and take responsibility. And whether we can debate whether the PLO actually is a conversation, but just like the Taliban is a brutal terrorist Islamist dictatorship organization that's just bad for everybody. Hamas in the same way. At least from my way. Maybe some of you guys feel differently, but I just want to let that be known.
I'm all
but at an individual level, I agree that they're the individuals. Each of you guys are individuals, and people who may have voted Hamas are individuals, and it's important at the ground to talk to each other and to
humanize
each side and humanize the individuals that are involved. And
so just a quick note about this. Hamas is actually part of the Palestinian people for many good reasons, and it thrives during absence of peace. The one thing, how I look at it and how many people in my city look at it, Hamas is exactly the same as Haganah, Stern, the Jewish militias pre-1948. They're exactly the same. I could not see a single difference between them. The only thing is,
that's right.
Yeah. The only difference is that they're Islamic. The other side is Jewish. So many Palestinians look at the Stern model and say, okay, well, they have succeeded in creating a company. Not a company. Sorry, I'm thinking of. Anyways, they've succeeded and created a country. Why don't we do the same? So the best way to explain Hamas is really just explain Haganah, explain Stern. They're exactly the same. They have the same.
It's not the same. Principle. They might have the same tactics, but it's not the same. The British were a foreign power, and I can understand that people look at Jews and Israelis and say they're foreigners, but according to the Jewish people, we are indigenous to the land. So you are using tactics that people indigenous to the land used on a foreign power. And you're using, the Palestinians are also, I don't deny that they're indigenous to the land, but it's two indigenous people fighting each other. You know what I mean? So it's a different scenario.
It is, I guess on paper, it can be seen as differently, but isn't as you said, in especially the Hamas narrative, you guys are also foreign to the land. So that's why it's done. We're not justifying that part. I just want to say, sorry, Jason, I just want to say to Joshua, while what you said about a lot of the connections in the past are definitely true, I'm sure, someone that Islamists, for example, hate Shia more than other groups. Like Sunni Islamists, for example, will hate Shia Muslims and other Muslims more. Yet Hamas works with Iran. Hamas works with whoever. And to be honest with you, in the near future, there's a very high chance that just how Israel now works with the PA, and 20 years beforehand they were fighting, now Israel allows $100 million, I think, a month or something to go from Qatar to Gaza.
Yeah, Qatar, Turkey.
No matter how you feel about that, they are working together in one way or another. Hamas tries to stop other groups sending rockets. And so really we can try and be puritanical, but unfortunately in the Middle East, it's filled with bad actors and strange relations.
And real politics.
And so that is the reality on the ground.
I guess I can agree with that.
Yeah.
That there is real politicking in the Middle East.
I just want to mention something about violence real quick, and just I want to preface this. I'm not saying Israel is an apartheid state. I do not think it is. I know that's kind of like a trigger word. I'm just saying that in apartheid South Africa, there's this sort of, I guess, mythos that's developed retrospectively that, oh, it was just peaceful. Like no, I mean, it was very violent, and, rightfully so, at least in some respects. And a lot of the deaths that occurred were warring anti-apartheid factions, like Nelson Mandela. Well, maybe not Nelson Mandela specifically, but I think one of his wives, was involved in violence against other Black South Africans, and these resistance, like, they're not universally peaceful. Even the civil rights movement in the United States, there was violence, and that's what even with which I mean. Well, okay, I'll bring those up, as a lot of people try to like say, well, why do you talk about Israel but not this? But what's going on in Xinjiang in China with the Uyghurs? Look, I mean, there are in fact, actual Uyghur terrorist organizations that have killed innocent people, and that's the excuse the Chinese government uses to commit genocide against them. I mean, I think people, like, when there is even the Nazis, like, people think like the Nazis were just, sitting around, like, rubbing their hands, like, you weren't evil, and like no, like, they had reasons, very bad reasons, very bad reasons, but they had reasons why they thought that, like, there was a global Jewish conspiracy literally out to destroy, the German people, and they're like, well, we have to kill them before they kill us. So that's like people, So I mean, that's just kind of my point. Like, people always try to find excuses for what they do.
So Hamas, it does, even with the rockets and with the violence, it has a very complicated relationship with Israel. Even in MENA, like, everything is very complicated. There's what's said and what's done. So, for example, Hamas does negotiate about things like releasing the aid payments, and also the trade and the extent of the fishing grounds, and that those things go through Israel. Meanwhile, Hamas arrested people quite recently for the equivalent of this call, something very similar to this call. They went to jail. So it seems to me, what do you make of that?
I want to say this, that when you're not as powerful as, like, a government that's recognized by the UN and by all these other nations, you have to do these dirty tactics to try to maintain your power. The reason why I believe a lot of countries allow freedom of press, such as Israel or the United States, is because to some extent they know it's not that influential to whatever's going to happen. You know what I mean? It could influence, but only to a certain extent, and an extent that they're comfortable with. At any point, if a Palestinian, I don't know anyone who lived in the West Bank, I didn't clarify this, but I'm actually Palestinian. I grew up over there, and I currently live in New York. But everyone knows that, like, you got to really be careful about your Facebook like history when you're crossing the Jisr or when you're crossing the bridge, because you might just stop and they'll tell you, nope, go back to Jordan. And so that's the thing. If, like, a country determines that, like, listen, these guys have a political thing that's going on that might be actually that might be a good contender in political, that may, like, shift the way people view things, some people might get arrested. You know what I mean? And so it's just the thing. Like, listen, like, what Hamas is doing is not wrong. Like, I have no love for Hamas. I'm not an Islamist. I don't fall into any of that stuff. But, like, just to go on to, like, what Tom was saying, is that there needs to be, like, there is reasons, whether they're good or not. There are reasons why things happen, and it's just important to realize what those reasons are, so we can, like, try to figure out a solution and try to, like, solve whatever we're dealing with.
I mean, I gotta say though, like, about terrorism, yes, terrorism, no, we can disagree for 10 years. But the thing is that the price that the Palestinian people pay for the violence of these organizations is not worth it. When I was in Protective Edge, Hamas launched a couple rockets, we lost 50 people. But do you know who really paid the price? It was the Palestinian people who were living in Gaza. And this whole violence, and this is always going to be this, like, the Palestinians pay the price. People pay the price of this violence much more.
Palestinians always pay the price in this regard. As in, I understand what you're saying. We've explained to you why people support them. We've explained to you why people support them. I agree with what you're saying. So as in we're just going to go in circles on this part, unfortunately. No, it does work. That's why they're still there. I understand what you're saying, as in, you guys don't really get affected as much And when you guys
What do you
respond,
mean
it's the
it
civilians that
works?
get affected.
I don't think it works as
Well, they're
much
still
as
in power. They're in
Israel
power. Hamas is in
tolerates.
power.
Israel
this is what
tolerates.
Got it. What do you mean by
mistaken.
it works? What works? I'm just.
Hamas
I
is in
didn't
I
power.
think
They
understand.
run the Gaza Strip.
Exactly. So because of absence of peace, again, because Hamas thrives during war, and the more war, the more fans they'll have. So this
As
is
in, I
why they're in
understand what
power
Right,
at the
Joshua is
right.
saying,
moment.
but as in, we've explained we've just explained as in why people go to them. We also have explained many aspects as well, why we disagree with stuff like that. And I know in Israelis mindset, it makes no sense. Hamas does something,
Oh.
Israelis respond, civilians died. But that's just how, as in, we've explained why people gravitate towards them, and Iyad and others have explained that in the vacuum of a peace situation, they're going to be there. And they've been there longer than ever. They've had Gaza for what, 14 years now?
But
Yeah, they got a fan
I
base.
agree with
Could
you.
you
I agree
agree?
with you, but I think it's the fact is that the reason Hamas exists is because Israel doesn't want to take responsibility for the Gaza Strip. They rather let Hamas run it because they don't want to have too much problems. They don't want to rule it. They don't
I
want
agree
to
with
do
you there.
that. And if they went in and they want to take care of Hamas, Hamas would be gone the next week. And I agree with. I think
Well, I don't know if
that's
that was
what it
next
is.
week, but I
And-
agree
and
that
it's
Israel.
Okay, example, but Israel could.
Around the world, in any situation around the world where another person's military is is in power and imposing rule over you, there will always be some form of guerrilla attacks or militant resistance and everything. That's just the nature of the game. And I think the bigger picture here beyond Hamas is what we've been sort of focusing on, is like how the situation even happened. Like I said before, the majority of the people that live in the Gaza Strip aren't originally from Gaza. They're from places that are now in Israel. And it's something which I would like to get your perspective on as Jewish people, in terms of how, like, what
The right of return?
Yeah, well, like how much like was taught in regards in, like, did you know that there was a 92% Arab majority on the land that had to be demographically reversed in order to create a stable basis for a Jewish country? And like, can you at least acknowledge that it wasn't reasonable for Arabs at the time in 1905, or like through up, to be against the idea of having Zionist rule imposed over them? Like, this whole demographic reversal is the root of the situation that we have now. And I don't blame both sides for taking the positions that they took. Jews needed to get out of Europe, right? And this is something which a
Not
lot of
just
other
Europe.
Palestinians, if they're listening, they can understand that Jews were never considered Europeans by other Europeans, and they needed a place to go, and they had a historic connection to this land. Now, the only thing is that there wasn't a real plan on what to do with the local demographic majority of the land. And I feel that this is something which has been left out of the conversation for far too long, because it gets drawn back to ideology, it gets drawn back to these things. And when the whole whole thing is about one people's having to demographically reverse another people in order to have a country, and now it's left those people living under military rule, right? Those who are not Israeli Arabs, who do not have the passport, and they're living in between. Like, I had a conversation to try and start a solar energy company to try and bring panels into the West Bank. We've had this conversation. So I would like to, let's talk about things that we can actually change, because I don't think any of us here are going to be able to go and change the Hamas charter tomorrow. So what can we change? What can we achieve out of this conversation, other than us explaining our narrative to you? But I guess first, I'd just like to hear about what you know about the demographics that had to be reversed in order for Israel to be Israel, and whether you were taught about that.
Listen, I wasn't raised in Israel, okay? And I'm the only one here, I think, in the Jewish. Oh wait, no, Yeshua too. We're the only two that live in Israel, but you weren't raised in Israel, right, Yeshua?
No, I was raised in the States.
Right. So, and then you came
Well,
for the
Adar
army,
also.
right?
Adar's not talking, but yeah, I came for the army, but I also came to live here.
Okay, Sababa. So I don't know what I was taught at school. I don't think Yeshua could be known either. I had a degree, okay, in
I
Middle
was taught
Eastern history and
in
political
a
science.
Zionist religious school, so I can talk to it a little bit more from an American Jewish perspective. But continue, Dani.
Yeah.
Sorry.
But when I was in my school in the University of Jerusalem, we did learn about the demographics. I don't want to like lie to you. I don't remember 92.8, but I do obviously remember like the narrative that we needed to become a majority from a minority. I think that it's very hard for Israelis to accept, including myself. Learning these things, I think that as an individual, if someone was to put a mirror in your face and say, this is how you look, it doesn't matter what your intentions were and how holy or whatever, it doesn't matter. This is the consequence of whatever vision you aspired for. Okay? It's hard
Can
for
you
a
see my
person.
Can you see my screen?
Yeah, Jason, I'll bring it up in a minute. We'll let Danny finish it.
Yep.
So I think it's really, really hard. It takes a lot to accept the fact that something that for us is a dream come true was able to be also in the same, on the other side of the coin, the worst nightmare for a different set of people. And I think that's, if you're asking me what can we do literally to change it, is one, open dialogue. Two, we're a generation of people who are now becoming teachers, politicians, activists, artists, authors, physicians, the likes. And we get to influence the younger generation with our thoughts. And I think that what we can do is just turn to our communities and change and challenge the hostility and the difficulty that both nations have to accept in their responsibility over whatever happened.
Just to comment quickly, Danny, on your point, the Palestinians were not the only victims of this. Many Jews were the victims of political Zionism. I mean,
Right.
Haganah and Stern have killed, I'd even argue, more Jews than Palestinians during that period. I mean, look at the bombing of ships just because certain number of Jewish refugees decided not to take refuge in Palestine, to go somewhere else. And the extreme Zionists were like, okay, well, we don't want them to go there, and we want to prevent future Jews from even thinking about it. And so they went and blown up a whole ship with 250 people on it, plus the crew member. So it's not just the Palestinians who were victims, it's a lot of Jews who were victims of Zionism, political Zionism.
Right.
And this is something people need to really
the
think
Haganah
about.
are not in power now, and that
Absolutely,
wasn't
and I appreciate
the IDF,
that.
and that wasn't the government. So
Well, they
I
became
think
the
that
IDF.
even if there was a
Haganah
radical
is the precursor of Likud.
No.
Not the
What did you
Likud
say,
of the
Sarah?
Isn't the Irgun the precursor of the Likud?
The Irgun, in certain ways, is the precursor of the Likud, and that
My
is
bad,
not.
Ergo, my bad. I'm sorry. Yeah.
I want.
I mean, the organization doesn't exist. I do agree with you, but their leaders actually took leadership positions later on in the government. So, a lot of Israelis today need to look at the history and understand what political Zionism has done to Jews around the world, not just Jews trying to take refuge.
I
But
want
Palestinians accept the responsibility of what has happened to innocent civilians, because I think most Israelis and Jews would agree with the cause, with the Palestinian cause, right? The right for self-determination in whatever shape or form. But the fight, as I see it, and as many Israelis see it, is not against the government who are responsible for these actions. You're hitting the country where it hurts most, and its innocent civilians. What delegitimizes to us the cause. If you were fighting the IDF, if you were fighting the government, first of all, on an international platform, your cause would be just. And I feel like Israel, as a right wing and an extreme, well, I don't want to say extreme, but I'm a wholehearted Israel lover. Okay, I couldn't support a cause that was fought justifiably.
Well, also another thing too about the demographic changes. The demographic changes came about by migration into the country largely, which is a very common way for demographic changes to come about. It happened, for example, to the USA a little earlier when the Western European demographic majority was lost as people came in from Southern Europe, Eastern Europe, and elsewhere. And nowadays people are coming into the US from all over the world. Now, people do discuss the demographic losses of people from the West in the United States, although I'm not going to name names. And in Israel itself, there was also a lot of migration after the state was founded from the Middle East and North Africa and other parts of the world, again, drastically changing the demographic dynamic. Now, Palestinians do seem to be particularly unhappy and probably did suffer more than most people because of the demographic changes. But I still think a couple of things here. First of all, how do you minimize the effects of the demographic change, minimize the adverse effects of the demographic changes on the people already there? We could do a much better job of this. And second of all, I actually think step one might be to for us to start rejecting the paradigm that Palestinians are unwanted. There is a paradigm pervasive throughout Israeli and even Jewish culture that Palestinians are unwanted, and this is causing a lot of problems to the point where there is a recent article published by a major think tank in Israel talking about Arab Knesset members, enemies of peace. Now, you don't have to agree with them, these Knesset members, to recognize that this is a racialized questioning, and it is very similar to the dual loyalty accusations against Jews. So in my synagogue, for example, I belong to a Reconstructionist synagogue, and one of the things that we are doing is thinking a lot about interfaith couples, which is a major demographic group in my community. And that it represents a change because the rate of intermarriage has gone way up. So now what do we do?
I'd really like to show you what I'm talking about. I've just put up this screen.
Yeah.
This is from probably not this is not a right or a left-wing resource. This is a fairly neutral resource. And just to show you what it is I was talking about is that if you look here, 1918, you'll see that Jews made up 8% of the population. This is a Jewish, non-Jewish population of Israel, Palestine. And then you can see after World War II, when Aliyah was being encouraged and everything, they made up only 30% of the population. And even that was not a stable basis to create a Jewish country. Otherwise, it would be minority rule. So what had to happen? And you look here, 1947, the population of non-Jews was 1.3 million. In 48, it was 156,000. These are all the towns and villages depopulated during the 1948 exodus, including the town Al-Damoun, which is where my surname Damouni comes from. So this is unlike anything else that has happened in modern history, and it is a very unique circumstance, and it is the reason why things are the way they are today. Now, the only thing that we need, that I guess as Palestinians would like to see from our Israeli Jewish cousins, is this type of just acknowledging this for us to be able to move on. This is what needed to happen for you to have the Zionist dream and to have your statehood. And I don't think that there's inherently anything racist or wrong with Zionism. I believe every people should have the right to their own self-determination, and that is why I believe in the right for Jews to have their own state. But
I got to push back.
Yeah, Yoshua, let me just hop in real quick.
Go for it, Adar.
So, Jason, to answer your original question, if we were taught this, so I could only speak for my upbringing, but the answer is no. And I think, generally speaking, we all learn history. When we're taught the history of our people or of our nations, it's often glorified. So, for example, in the United States, maybe it's not like this today, but you'll learn that Christopher Columbus is a hero. They don't tell you that he was genocidal, right? So that's not part of our narrative in any way, shape, or form. Any injustice that was committed to the Palestinians by the early Zionists is not mentioned. Now, I think this is just quite consistent across the board in how nations teach their people history, but it is a very important point about demographic change, and I think we need understanding of this because it's relevant to both people, right? If we want to understand one of the injustices that was committed towards the Palestinians, it was a demographic change that was intentional, as you say.
Well, it was necessary. Otherwise, there would be no stable basis to create Israel. It was a necessary change, unintentional, intentional.
But so with that, that same concept of demographic shift and the psychological toll it plays on a population is exactly why concepts like the right of return or just a one binational state is so foreign to most Israelis. It's for the same exact reason. So, obviously we all need to acknowledge the injustices of the past. I believe it's part of reconciliation. But we also, as you mentioned, Jason, we need to be understanding of the psychological toll and the concern of a demographic shift on both sides, right? It's the solution to an injustice is not another injustice.
Correct. And that is why I don't advocate for the demographic reversal of Israel. I think that our Jewish brothers and sisters have suffered enough in Europe and should have the security and the freedom to be able to do with that, to have their own state and everything. But at least acknowledge that this happened at the denial of our national identity, our national state, so that we can at least build a new narrative together where we can enjoy being both under civilian law and working together to make the land somewhat prosperous and everything. Now, whether that is through a two-state solution or whether it is dividing up the territories so we don't mess up our numbers within our own political bodies. We need to be in separate polities, so that there's no struggle over who has the biggest demographics, and we can just focus on coexisting in the same place and building business, building the land, and moving on with things. And I guess for that to happen, there needs to be two things. You need the Jews and the Arabs who want to coexist to outnumber the radicals on both sides. And we have to seek out those on our respective sides to help de-radicalize them or participate in some effort, whether it's me going to other Palestinians and trying to explain the Ashkenazi struggle throughout Europe and why Zionism had to happen, even though most Orthodox Jews were against Zionism at the very beginning until they got pushed to a point where there was.
I'm sorry,
it's not just an Ashkenazi struggle. It was a Jewish struggle.
There's a lot of you said on what you said, Jason.
Ashkenazi and Mizrahim alike.
You can't just say, "Oh, this is about Jews in Europe." I think this is a blind eye that a lot of Palestinians have. I think it's just about
The outcome's the same. Yeah.
I wasn't implying, just to clarify, I wasn't implying that, but a lot of people from our side see Ashkenazi Jews as European when they're not. And that is something that needs to be, that's something that's, and for the other side, for our Sephardi and Mizrahi brothers, before the Balfour Declaration, before the Islamic civilization flipped from being paranoid, from being tolerant of its minorities somewhat compared to European Christian civilization, the Jewish people had the Jewish Academy of Baghdad. They served as advisors to the caliphs. There was a rich, the Talmud was written in Iraq. There was a rich history of Jews and Christians existing within the Balad al-Sham region under the Muslim civilization. This was not something which happened in Europe, as opposed to all the Greek, Roman gods. All the things just got wiped out. There's no trace of that left in Europe, these cultures. So I'm not, we can't judge the past through the eyes of the present, but that at least in terms of reconnecting as Abrahamic cousins, we can look at times where the Jews in those regions, before the atrocities of the Farhud or the Ujda and everything. I think this is what our Arab brothers need, because the Palestinians didn't do that to those communities, but as a collective, acknowledge what happened to them, acknowledge what happened to everybody that had things happen to them, right? And drive the conversation where it's just about, okay, guys, like, yeah, our earlier generations had a lot of issues and conflicts and things like that, and there were grave injustices that had happened. But in the end of the day, our Jewish cousins got to have a state, and we're still trying to find our legal identity. And this is something which I hope this conversation will contribute in a bigger part of moving that to being able to just finally, live and grow the country together.
I mean, I gotta agree with you that finding a way to live and grow together and to recognize each other's pains. But for me, when people say the Jews have to recognize that, that they were on the Israelis, I should say, should have to recognize they were on the wrong side in 1948. And that they did everything wrong, and that they have to accept that they did wrong to the Palestinians. For me, it's hard for me to accept, because it makes us seem like we were born in sin. And you talked about what we
No. And if I gave you that impression, that's the wrong impression.
That's not what he's implying.
Let me bring forth a little distinction on this, because it's important. Nobody should be guilty in any way, shape, or form for the actions of their ancestors or parents at all, right? And I think, and we see this conversation happening a lot, whether it's, white Americans that are descendants of slave owners, they're not responsible in any way, shape, or form for those injustices. Israelis are not in any way, shape, or form responsible for injustices committed towards Palestinians, and Palestinians are not in any way responsible for any terrorism that may have been committed by their ancestors.
I'm talking about generation itself. I don't believe we're built.
But that being said, reconciliation is essential, and it seems like one of the single best ways to reconcile is just an acknowledgement of the errors of our ancestors. Because while we're not guilty for those actions, they still are our own people, and acknowledging that does a whole lot in allowing the other side to see that we care for them. So the acknowledgement, I view it as more symbolic than anything. We're not guilty, but we come from a people who committed injustice towards another group of people. And if we could acknowledge that I feel is part of the reconciliation process. And this goes both ways, right? I don't like comparing whose injustice is worse, but I think both sides have something to acknowledge when it comes to the past, even the near past. There's still, the occupation still exists. There's still terror attacks, right? So, there's still something to be said about acknowledging our errors, but we can do that without being personally guilty for it. So I think that's important to understand.
I also want to clarify. I want to clarify. I understand. Just as I understand why Palestinians did not want to be demographically reversed and have Zionist rule imposed over them. I'm not saying Israel is born in sin. I also understand why Israel had to come to exist and had legitimate reason to exist, because the Jewish people needed to have a homeland free of persecution. They have, just like any other people, the right to their own national identity. So I'm not saying that you are born in sin. I'm not saying, Israel is, Israel is inherently evil. No, I'm saying that both sides' actions were reasonable at the time in terms of their position. And now we're in 2020, almost 2021 soon. We are in a better position as the younger generation to connect and have these conversations that our past generations could not have, so that we can learn to coexist.
Is it okay if I just say something real quick? Or go ahead, Danny.
Yeah.
No, go for it.
Okay, thank you. So I want to say, this is just like from my experience of like, I'm studying education right now, and like one class that I'm taking right now is teaching history to children. And New York is a very progressive environment. It's like we're taught a lot of progressive things. A lot of the stuff we're talking about is how to teach culturally relevant pedagogy. So that's the long way of saying how to teach to kids that is tailored from their cultural background. And one of the most important things is that like, it's not to make the whole point of like trying to teach kids about like the wrongdoings of Columbus and, let's say, American colonialism. It's not to say like, listen, you're white, feel bad about it. Like the same way I'm not going to go up to a Catholic and say, remember the Crusades? That was pretty messed up what you guys did. You know what I mean? It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense to like think about it that way. It's just to realize in the same way, like if someone, I'm not going to go up to Muslim and be like, damn, you guys like messed up a lot of stuff like back in the day or like currently or whatever. You know what I mean? So like, the thing is just to acknowledge that like, listen, no, like every nation has skeletons in its closet. I don't know of any country where like people just got invited in, they're just like, okay, and just accepted it. There's always going to be some like sort of pushback or something. And the important thing is just to acknowledge that things like that happen, and they're wrong, and we're different people now. I'm not my dad, I'm not my grandfather. Neither is everyone over here. We're our own people right now, and we don't have to bear the sins of or the rewards or the praise of our ancestors. They're cool. They had their time. It's time to do our thing, and the thing now to do is try to figure out a good way to deal about this. And whether it's like acknowledging all the stuff, like Palestinians, like if you acknowledge the Hebrew massacre, or Israel got to acknowledge the 1948 and the demographic reversal, it's not like Yeshua specifically needs to go and feel bad. I'm like, listen, it's your fault. Why do you didn't have any choice being a Jew as I did being a Palestinian? Like, we just got thrown into the situation. So I feel like it's just to like understand from that perspective. Yeah.
Well, I think it's just taught as a zero-sum game.
Yeah.
If I'm Israeli, that means you can't be Palestinian because there is no Palestine. And if you're Palestinian, then I can't be Israeli because there is no Israel.
Yeah.
That's something I'm picking my brain at. How can you speak to people and show them that one identity doesn't come at the expense of the other?
That's an excellent question. Maybe someone can answer that.
Well, I mean, I'll just say, like, there's not, within Israel, like, yes, technically there is an Israeli nationality, but, like, there's no, like, Israeli nation. Like, if I'm not, like, it's sort of a controversial thing, but, like,
Am Israel, like, I think I don't know where you're getting your information from, but Israel was brought from the Torah. Sorry that I came out really super.
No. I don't Israel.
I felt it in my answer.
Talking about the state of Israel, because the state of Israel, to my understanding, there's ID cards, and they'll list your, I think, ethnicity. They'll say Jew, Arab, Circassian, whatever. And if you're someone like me who's a patrilineal, whose mother is a Gentile, his father was Jewish, I think if I were to make Aliyah, it would probably like say like undetermined or not something, because like there's not like a real sense of like cohesion. Like, yes, Israel is 25% Gentile, but at the same time, if a Palestinian emigrates, like a Palestinian citizen of Israel emigrates from Israel, I mean, let's be honest, it's the cause for celebration. If a Jew does it, it's sad. There's a term for it called yarida, to my understanding, it's actually sort of an issue in Israeli politics because each party is like, well, here's what we can do to decrease area or bring people, but like and here's the thing, like that would not necessarily, if Israeliness, it wouldn't be it being synonymous with Jewishness, it wouldn't be a problem, if there it was not founded on top of another nation, but even just within Israel proper, 25% of the people in no way, shape, or form identify as Jews. If you include the occupied territories, it's possibly a majority. So I think that's why people object to Zionism. It's one of those. It's just because there's no real sense of what it means to be an Israeli, or if there is, it just means to be Jewish.
I think that's a topic that Israel talks about, like Israelis between themselves, right? Because a lot of people look at Judaism not only as a religion, but as a nation, right? So Israel can be a country of the new Jewish nation that was created from Jews, as in the Jewish religion. But today, most of us are secular. Believe me, Jews themselves, I am a Jew, my soon-to-be husband is a Jew, and we're not getting married through the Rabbanut because we think it's ridiculous that if I wanted to marry someone else, I couldn't because they're not Jewish and I'm a Jew. And so that's something that Israelis themselves debate over. And there's no overlapping.
Between Jews, you mean? Between Jews, because again, like at the very least, like a quarter of Israelis, on paper Israelis, are not Jewish. And if you include the occupied territories, it's possibly a majority. And I think that does cause some kind of, resentment. I was, before prepared for this, I was actually looking over some Q polls on Israeli attitudes, and, I'm seeing it's like 98% of Israeli Jews either say that all or most of their friends are Jewish, like they have no non-Jewish friends. And it's like, and a lot of
they don't know.
Or
they don't know.
See, that's where
people
I
don't
think
ask.
it's
It's not a
because
question you ask in Israel, are you Jewish? I've never asked a person, are you Jewish? I'm like, Israel is a Jewish nation.
This isn't like a biased, this isn't like deathtoisrael.net, and this is an unbiased.
I mean, but where are you going? Many Jews who live in Israel, they don't really, and I think, and this is both sides. I've met multiple Palestinians. I'm pretty sure the first deep conversation they had with the Jew was me. And just based on the first deep, or maybe they don't know non-Palestinians. They don't know Jews, and if you live in Netanya and you go to a Jewish school and everybody in your neighborhood is Jewish, where are you going to meet non-Jews? It's
true.
not part of your world.
Where do you mix with guys like Ramla, Lod, Haifa, Yafa? Like, you don't mix that often. Like, even in Jerusalem, you mixed, like, unless if you're in the tourist industry. As in Jerusalem, like, I lived in Jerusalem, I never mixed with the Jewish quarter at all.
I don't know.
I would see them. I would see them ago, but I'd never mix with them.
So how do
my friends are all Christians? My closest friends are Christians or atheists.
I got mostly Jewish friends.
So I don't know. Maybe I have a weird experience, but for me, I saw Muslims and Jews and Christians and Armenians. Like, it wasn't, for me, it was super together. You know what I mean? I didn't experience the
I'm gonna be real. I lived in Ramallah for like 9 years. I've seen Jews like probably like 4 times. I've seen like 4 Jews like all my time over here. Most of the Jews I've seen are in New York. You know where I am now, and so it's
more
like
Jews in New York than they are in Israel.
I always made the joke. At the time, you know. At the same time, it's the land of Israel #2. But like the thing is, it's because, like, listen, like, I live, the settlement near my house is Beit El. It's huge. I see it, the roof tiles, but there's a big wall around it. You know what I mean? And so I don't know, like, for all I know, no one lives there. You know, there's no point.
I used to work out of Beit El, funny enough.
Okay, then you're right next to our neighbor.
The thing that I would just a question on like Jewish, like Judaism being like a nation. Because it's like you will only have like Jewish Jews or agnostic Jews or atheist Jews. There's no, like, you can't have a Christian Jew or a Buddhist Jew.
You do have Buddhist Jews, by the way, and Christian Jews.
Yeah.
Well, there's also a huge group Jews who believe in Jesus. I found that
Jews for
very,
Jesus.
Well,
Jews for Jesus.
This is very questionable. It's very questionable.
I'm actually gonna come out with a controversial opinion. I don't think Jews for Jesus is any more, different than other Jews. They are different, but it's not like more ridiculous. Religion is believing things that are unfalsifiable, unprovable. All Jews for Jesus believe is that Jesus was the Messiah, and all other Jews think the Messiah is yet to come. I mean, I put them on an equal.
The name is
The
catchy,
Messianic
which
Jews
is why
are
it
Jews.
makes me laugh.
Well, it's kind
Jews
of like
for
how
Jesus.
people make fun of Latter-day Saints or Mormons or whatever, because it's like, oh, they believe, Jesus came to America, whatever. And it's like, well, is that really more ridiculous than other stuff in, like, the Bible? Like, I don't know.
The Muslim version of Ahmadi Muslims or Ahmadi, the Qadiani Muslims from northern India. There's actually a community. There's actually a community.
I think that points to the nationhood of the Jewish people in the sense that, and I think you heard this with Rudy Adar, that he talked about how you can say what he called that a Jew for Jesus is still a Jew, but there is a Jewish religion and a Jewish thought, and you can take it or you can leave it. But there is a traditional Jewish religion which belongs to that community. The same, hey, the Navajo have their own religion, and you don't have to choose that. But to say that that believing in Jesus or believing in Muhammad is a Jewish thought, it's not. I mean, from a religious perspective, if that makes sense.
Look, I think sorry to interrupt, Rebecca, but I think this chat is a demonstration of how these religions developed. Because if you notice, we originally were talking about Hamas, now we're discussing Jews for Jesus and Mormonism. So I imagine when Semites have too much time on their hands, creative stuff like this happens.
Let's start like an anti-Mormon movement. We can just be all anti-Mormon, connect on that.
Well, believe it or not,
I disagree.
Mormons, they were all, like, people freaking hated them. There was like an extermination order against them.
Yeah. They
hated them.
By the way, did you see the Book of Mormon play? That awesome play.
Yeah.
Maybe Mormons will bring peace to the Middle East. Who knows? Maybe.
Very nice people, though. Every Mormon I've met has been super nice. Very kind, nice people.
Don't Mormons think that Jesus was American?
They believe like Jews are like Native Americans, and they found some clay tablets and they ran away, and I don't know. So it's like
they have a third book.
It's nothing as extraordinary as any other other religious text. You know what I mean? Like, it's just funny because it's just like a spin-off series on Christianity, but it's not like really. But that's really if you really looked at it in the backdrop of all religions, it's not like there's nothing extraordinarily uniquely weird about it. You know what I mean?
Can I ask a question about? I think Jason, you said that Israel has kind of and Jews in general, it's kind of like an incohesive and abstract name, or and I feel like for Jews, we see the same thing with Palestinian identity. I think in a sense both nations are going through an identity crisis. But when I, for example, read about Palestinian identity, so I'm like, okay, there's just so many different theories and none of them are united. And people are saying, they've originated from here, from the when they went from Arabia under the Caliphate, and then from the Canaanites, and then from this. So you're just like,
no. Well, let me unpack that. So look, Palestinian Christians, like myself, right, descend from ethnic Jews that followed the Messiah during the time of the revolution of 66. In the year 66, there was a big revolution and Rome got kicked out. Now, before the Romans were kicked out, there was a division among Jewish society. There was the high priest, there was the temple guard, and then there was the sort of peasant class that resented the noble class and saw the high priest as a Roman puppet that was corrupted, right? So you had many people that were ethnic Jews, like Jesus, going around and telling people, don't pay tax to the temple, they're just going to pay it to Rome, because there was the big golden eagle on the top of the temple at some point, and this was the division within the society. Now, year 34 happens, Jesus is crucified, and now this time, and the sort of the Jews that are against the nobility are forming bandit-like gangs on the outskirts of society, and they become more militant up until the year 66. Now, as they become more militant, they start assassinating any Jew that they considered to be a Roman collaborator. And when that wasn't working, they started assassinating Roman guards themselves. And so when they started assassinating Roman guards, the Roman governor at the time would summon the high priest and say, you find the Jew that killed this Roman guard, or we're going to crucify 10 of your children in the morning, or some sick, twisted stuff like that. And it pushed the high priest in a position where he ended up reaching out to these bandit gangs to be like, listen, we have our disagreements, but Rome has to go. We've been occupied for too long. We can't put up with this crap. So 66 happens. Then what happens is the temple is reestablished. The high priest is like, okay, everybody, time to pay tax to the temple. And then you had a whole group of people, ethnic Jews, that were like, no, we're not going to pay tax. Jesus came around and said the temple is within. We're just going to do that. And so the high priest is like, okay, all you that don't want to fall back in line to the status quo of Judaism, you're banished as Gentiles. And so those group of peoples left and formed their own community and cultures, and these were the first Christians. Now Rome comes back in the year 70 and destroys the temple and is going around destroying anything remotely Jewish. And they get to these villages and they're like, hang on a second, who are you? You look Jewish, but you're not acting Jewish. What's up with you? And those people were like, no, we're not Jewish. They hate us because we didn't fall back in line or something like that. We're banned. We have our own little Jesus movement going on over here. And so the Romans were like, oh, okay, since they hate you, you guys were all right, but we're going to take a little look at your Jesus movement. You're going to make it real Roman friendly. You're going to pay tax to Caesar. You're going to make it anti-Jewish. Probably blame the Jews for the death of Jesus, not Pontius Pilate. You're going to paint him as like some saint that had a dream. And I'm sure other Christians will probably disagree with me, but this is my own history of my demographic people. And those communities got to remain, and Rome eventually appropriated those stories into a religion.
Well,
So
what about the other period
this is where Palestinian Christians came from.
Israel?
Then Muslims came.
Okay, yeah. Well, the land was under Christian control for very significant periods of its history. It was under the Byzantine Empire. It was under the British Empire. And during those periods of time, especially, I would imagine that there would have been a very significant number of conversions by other people.
Yes, other Christians started to came, but Palestinian Christians, people like me from Al Damoun or those that were in Nazareth, those were the same demographics of Jesus, right?
Yeah. Well,
Well, how do you know that your family didn't have Greek Christians who married into it? I'm just wondering, like, how do you? Because as you mentioned, the point, the majority of the was Greek Christians.
Ashkenazi people know that their heritage is Jewish. You know, it's no
You guys
more
don't
deep.
intermarry. You guys don't intermarry with other Christian communities within Israel and Palestine. That's like a thing.
Whether it's Maronite Lebanese Christians or Palestinian Christians, I mean, like the culture was very Middle Eastern in the same way, in the sense that we would marry within each other's families, and you know that this was the way of the old. This was even in my parents' generation, you know. So look, everyone is mixed in the end of the day in some way or another, you know. And but this, like, just as Ukrainian Jews have a deep historic connection to the land of Israel and everything like that, I mean, how have they been mixed? You know what I mean? Throughout Europe, everyone has been mixed.
Yeah.
So all of this is irrelevant. But what I was trying to describe is like the makeup of Palestinian society, because, you know, some did come from the Arabian Peninsula during the Islamic conquest, and there was a famous truce between Umar bin Khattab and the Patriarch Sophronius in the year 637. which allowed for the Jews and the Christians to have ecclesiastical autonomy. They ran their own courts, they elected their own leaders, compared to Christian Europe, which wiped out all the pagan culture that existed there. This was a very advanced way. This was a very multicultural, multi-ethnic society. There was Sephardi, there was a strong Sephardi community there, living among Armenians, living among Circassians. In fact, during the time where other Arabs were being gifted countries, like Jordanian is a made-up identity that was gifted a country. Yeah. So was Syrian, so was the Lebanese. The only people that was starting to form sons to develop a distinct sense of nationhood were ironically the people that were denied a nation, which was us.
Well, also, do you as a Christian feel do you resonate with the Palestinian identity? Because the rhetoric is Muslim, and that's kind of like
the town where I'm from.
I heard way too many voices.
I'm sorry. I said more. So Palestinian Christians are more like, I feel, support the Palestinian national movement more than I feel like a lot of Palestinian Muslims do.
Not only that, Faraj, but we created it.
Basically,
yeah.
Well, I learned that Christians were the first to advocate for the name Palestine as part of the Palestinian identity. They were kind of the forefathers of creating this identity during a time of nationalism elsewhere in the world. But I'm like,
well, yeah, before that, most people
Islamic militant groups
identify with the Sham. That is true. Like Christians were at the forefront of it.
Arabs. So we were distinctly different from Khaliji Arabs. So Shami Arabs are like Lebanese, Syrian, Palestinian. Right. And so we like all nationalism is a fairly new thing, like going back like 200 years. So at the time of the Industrial Revolution, people are becoming more connected. The other Arab countries were becoming countries, and the Palestinians were starting to become more aware that they were Palestinian. So the people in Beirut and Sidon, they got to fortify themselves as Lebanese. People in Aleppo, they got to fortify themselves as Syrians. People in Amman and Petra, they got to fortify themselves as Jordanians. But what was in common for the people that were living in Haifa all the way down to Beersheba? It was only in those cities that we ran the risk of becoming a minority in those cities, not the people in Beirut, not the people in Damascus. The Zionists wanted to rule on, wanted to specifically go to this specific area, which we were, and so that only added to our sense of, okay, we all share the same risk of being a minority in our own cities that we've lived in for centuries. We need to start being more cohesive and everything, and so we formed the Arab Higher League or something.
There was also the Muslim Christian associations that were dominant. Every town and village had a Muslim Christian association.
The basis of being a Palestinian was being accepting of other people, was being a multi-religious, multi-ethnic society that was inclusive of everyone during a time where people weren't inclusive of people. And these are the fundamental values that I believe that Palestinians like Tarek and myself and Faraj and Iyad share.
And I just want to point out, I know Danny might find this interesting, but I'm pretty sure, I know Hezbollah has one, but I'm pretty sure Hamas has a Christian brigade within their ranks. And so does, I know Hezbollah does have a Maronite brigade inside their ranks. So a lot of this stuff are
it doesn't make sense on paper. What Muhammad's saying is true.
Yeah, exactly. No one's looking at Islam and trying to read hadith, where can I find this hadith to make me justify what I'm doing to, no one's doing that. People they just rally around the comments cause hey, well, most of us are Muslim, so I guess we can just join in together. We got Christian friends, they can come in too. Why not? They can have their own section. And that's pretty much what it was. It's not any way to try to justify saying, see, look how diverse and inclusive Hamas or Hezbollah is. But just to put in perspective of how it actually, how Palestinians even see these organizations.
I mean, I gotta say something though.
I just want to say, sorry, Josh, for cutting you off. But in regards to minorities, have to be more in the Middle East, more nationalistic, because they need a state to protect them. So if you look at it, minorities, especially in Bilad Shams, like that, Christians are nearly always in urban areas, so they need a strong state. While many Islamic tribes actually, depends which ones, but for example, like they benefit from a weak state. Because like a weak state means not getting pushed around by the government. But if you're a minority, you want a state that can take care of you. So that's why you'll find, especially in Palestinian society, but even in Arab nationalism in Iraq and Syria, like it was led, or I think it was Michel Aflaq or Michel Aflaq, I think one of those two. Like as in, you find minorities.
Well, it also depends which state. The modern history of MENA, in fact, in the last century, it does seem to have accelerated the process of oppression of minorities in the region of MENA. So it depends which minorities, which state. If you look at Baha'i or Zoroastrians in the modern-day Islamic Republic of Iran, that is a pretty strong state, and they are not in very good shape. It all depends whether your central
that's an Islamic state.
Is on your side. And it's an Islamic state, yeah. But it is a stronger government. And Saddam Hussein, I believe he also, that was Muslim-led, but not such an Islamic state, and he oppressed minorities.
Saddam oppressed minorities, but for example, if you towed the line with him, he wouldn't touch you. So if you shut up with politics and said, yes, I'm an Arab, whatever, he wouldn't touch you. But if you did anything that went against him, you'd be put in prison. But I get what you're saying, because in the Middle East here, minorities need a strong state. Which, well, for example, you find people in Hebron do not want a strong state.
Minorities need a state on their side. Like,
yes.
That's basically what they need, not just a strong state, but a state that is their advocate. And this is part of the argument for minority self-determination in the region, that because the region is very ethnically sorted in terms of the political the ideologies, self-determination is a model that is assumed to protect the ethnic group that has the self-determination.
Mm-hmm. Yes, but it wouldn't be reasonable. Like, for example, let's take Zoroastrianism, right? No one can deny that Zoroastrianism was in Persia, or it was in Iran before Islam.
Yeah.
Right? So it would be like the Parsis that are currently in Gujarat, India, like who are Zoroastrian, being like, all right, we want to make Iran Zoroastrian again and impose our rule over the majority of the Muslims there. Is it reasonable to expect Iranians today to accept Zoroastrians coming back and imposing their rule in their country and making Iran into a Zoroastrian country again? Would it be reasonable?
Well, pre-1948, early in the part of the last century, people were not so much dividing the land in the way that we think of it today. Israel and Jordan were lumped together as the same mandate. So the idea was a partition of the land. This was the original idea. It obviously hasn't worked and it's had real issues, but one of the original ideas was a partition of the land between Jewish Israel and Arab Transjordan. So an analogy
we would still be the majority in what would be Israel. That's what Jason's getting at.
Right.
As in, like, why would we have accepted the situation?
An analogy might be a small area of Iran, because Zoroastrians are a tiny part of the population. So if the Zoroastrians are making the case that they are being persecuted by Iran and their self-determination is crucial, a Zoroastrian regime in a small area of Iran, because they're a tiny minority, that would represent historical and cultural significance to Zoroastrianism. And then,
but why should the Persians there, who are a mixture of the Zoroastrians and the Muslims, accept being dispersed from their land? As in, there's still Persians living there. I know you say
what if they wanted to head on? What if they wanted to head on, since it was like, it has a very significant. It's their Jerusalem basically, and that's where the Zoroaster did his great sermon or something like that. Like that's the thing. Like there's no good way of trying to justify things like this happening, and so like the point is like the one thing is like to acknowledge it. But I just wanted to sidetrack one thing. This comes up a lot, and I want to just say this on a recording because I feel like a lot of people just like I keep on thinking being refuted. A lot of people say like, oh, but like Arabs, like some of these Palestinians, they have names like Al Masri, which means the Egyptian, or Al Suri, which means the Syrian and stuff like that. Therefore, you guys are, listen, I live in America right now. If I go back to Ramallah right now, someone might call me Muhammad Faraj al-Amriki, the American. Doesn't mean I'm related to George Washington, you know what I mean? So it just, like, you could go, someone can go to visit Egypt for a second, come back, and be like, oh, that's the guy that went to Egypt. He's the Masri guy. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
like, and
It's
they are
just like
Sephardic,
Israelis.
Sephardic, and their last name is Ashkenazi. Does this mean that they are Ashkenazim? No, they're probably as Sephardic as everyone else, but they are descendant of Ashkenazim that migrated into Syria. Hence, their last name is so and so, the Ashkenazi.
Yeah, exactly.
Gabi
My name
Ashkenazi
is-
is like
but look at my name. Look at my name.
Yeah.
Damoon.
It's just-
It comes
it's a
from a
silly
town called
conversation.
Damoon.
Any time where people are trying to delegitimize another group of people by pointing to their last name or where their parents or ancestors came from, we should just reject those notions outright, because they're not helpful. I don't care if you're indigenous. I don't care how many generations you've been on the land. If you live on a land currently, if you live in a home currently, you have connection to that place, it's immoral to displace you from that home.
That's
And
right.
you know, that should just be like a base moral understanding that we don't
Absolutely.
break. So, you know, let's start from that place of mutual recognition that we don't displace
100%.
people. We all have the right to be here. We just need to find a way to make it work with one another.
100%.
I
I just want to
wanted to
address
say-
also the partition that was like, let's say we accepted the partition, right? The thing is, if we accepted the partition, you would have one side, Palestine, that would have Arab majority, but in the proposed Israel part of it, there would still be probably just a significant Arab minority there. It would probably have been a 50. So we would still like the thing is, even if we had accepted the partition, the numbers wouldn't have worked on that side of the land either, because you would have a significant 40% of the Knesset in the proposed state being significantly Arab as well. So, and in order to have a Jewish state, you need a distinct demographic Jewish majority. And so that is why we need separate legislators, so our demographics don't mess with each other's, and that way you can stay as a Jewish state, and we can have like a form of government that we can be represented in and have a passport and all that, and not fall under Israeli military rule. And so I can understand why the partition plans all fell apart. Plus, there were things going on in the background, radicals on both sides adding fuel to the fire, you know, whether it's calling to drive the Jews back into the sea, or whether it's to transfer Palestinians to Jordan. You know, these are things that happen on both sides. These are things that happen on both sides, and these are things that none of us in this chat group would condone. And I think that is a fantastic thing, and we should all give ourselves a pat on the back for coming together in this capacity and having this discussion. So,
Yeah. Yes, because also we are two demographic groups that have, despite our close geographical proximity, been too isolated for too long. In a place like the United States, with the immigration of both of these groups into the country, we are starting to have more integration on a more equitable third-party footing. And I do think that having a third-party footing and being able to try out alternative models is important, because if the goal is, I won't even use the word peace, I'll say to build something good together, then we do need to try this out in multiple cultures, multiple environments. There is some of this as well going on in the land of Israel and in Palestine, between in places like the West Bank, between Jews and Israeli Arabs in Israel. And both of these types of grassroots efforts are important in each of the different parts of the world that we are in together. The internet as well, because we can break down barriers, I can talk to people in Australia, and that's really nice.
Hell yeah.
And in Israel. And so it becomes its own territory with its own rules. Now, what those rules are, we do need to work on them. There is ground to be covered to define a proper set of mores for the internet. And one of the places that this is really suffering in is Twitter. So, for example, I maintain a forum that is dedicated to, in addition to the one about peace, I also have another forum dedicated to cleaning up social media. It's called Clean Up Twitter. And it's also on Quora.com. And, but basically there are a lot of issues we can work on together. There's a lot of ground to be covered.
Friends, real quick, we're closing in on the 2-hour mark, so I think let's do a round of final thoughts. It could be about anything that was discussed or something that wasn't discussed. Maybe it could be focused on what steps we can take from here to to progress the peace process, and maybe also share your favorite food from the region, because I think that would be interesting to see how similar our preference for cuisine is. While you all think about that, friends who are joining us for the first time, subscribe. And how do those YouTubers say? Smash that like button, smash it. But I also urge people to downvote this if they don't like it, because just we're all about freedom of expression, regardless of if you like what we do or not. We still like you and we like your expression. We also have a Patreon. Help us. You could support us for as little as $1 a month. Help us put out more content. If anyone wants to be on a future episode like this, reach out to me. You'll see my info in the description, and please join our Discord. What you just witnessed here happens a few times a week on Discord, spontaneously. But at the very least, every Thursday for the after party after our live stream. So here, let me toss that link in the comments. Boom, join our Discord, and yeah, let's start the little circle.
I just want to note that Star Hopper said one good thing about Arabs over here. I just want to think it's a really important point. He said Arabs do food well, which is the first time I've ever heard him say anything. So yeah, I mean, I'm really glad to speak to Star Hopper. I hope you keep in the right direction, man. I'm really happy for your positive vibes, man.
Star Hopper, we love you behind.
Yeah, kol hakavod.
Starhop is almost an honorary Palestinian at this point.
Yeah. I remember the music.
Wait. Are we doing the round thing now?
Yep.
All right.
All right. So,
Yeah, just final thoughts. Final thoughts on what food you like.
Final thoughts is that we have to build a common narrative. I think anything separate, whether identity, politics, whatever, it's just going to divide us even more. Historically, like Jason said, and it resonated with me, we live together. And so I really hope we can do that in the future. And food, I just love going to Jaffa and eating anything they give me. So let's go with hummus, but literally anything they'll give me there is amazing.
Cool. So I think I do agree with Daniel. One thing I always stress to everyone, really, not just Palestinians, not just Israelis, not even Armenians, Azeris, Indians, Pakistanis, is, try and look at history from a completely different viewpoint. Try and find the reasons behind things and why things have happened, and don't just take it that your side is completely right and the other side is completely wrong. There is no right or wrong. There's no evil or not. I think that's one of the most important things. And as for food, I think I'm a Hebronite, so I go for our special dish. It's called Idre. It's nothing special. It's just a lot of animal fat.
Yeah.
All right. So
Are we going to turn? Are we going in like a turn?
Go. Who knows?
Oh,
Whatever.
You're like Rose.
Go, Jason, and then I think it's your turn. Ayad just spoke, no?
Okay.
Yeah.
So my final thoughts and message to everybody listening is don't react to the radicals on the other side. Look for those on the other side that want to coexist and find them, come together like we're doing now, and outnumber the radicals on both sides. And let's start normalizing, talking and communicating and understanding each other's narratives, and not normalize the current situation we're in, because by doing one we can change the other. And I'm really happy and honored to be a part of this group. So, and my favorite food, either knefi or baklava.
You got a sweet tooth, huh?
Hell yeah.
You're from the north, that's why.
Al Damon.
You're a northerner, that's why.
Yeah, bro.
Yeah.
So I'll actually start with my favorite food, and I just thought about Middle Eastern food. I just thought about this, and a little bit underrated, but sahlab.
Sahlab. Oh yeah, that's a good one.
You have to go to Damascus to try that.
That stuff is the shit.
It's super good over there.
Just for you guys in English, it is a really unappealing name in English. It's saloop, but I recommend you guys try it. It's amazing.
I got it.
But so the message I'd like to deliver is that that the reality of peace is no longer. We have to know the reality of peace is not going to be through separation. It's not going to be through one state here for these guys and one state. It's going to come together in unity. And I think something that really resonates with me is what President Reuven Rivlin said, that it's not the Jews and the Arabs aren't doomed to live together. We're destined to live together. And I think that's future is exploring a one-state solution, how we can make that happen, that works for everybody. And that the first step is not above by building the car first, but building the pieces, which is just the humanization of each side. And
Amen.
Right, well, actually, just a quick thing with Yeshua. Yeah, Reuven Rivlin. Even though he's a Likudnik, he's kind of an underrated politician. So it's unfortunate he doesn't have more power. He does seem like a genuinely good guy. But yeah, my thing is, look, this was a lot of fun. I really appreciate you having me here. 2020 has been just the annus horribilis, so just a terrible year. I know it's already technically the next year on the Hebrew calendar. So let's just hope, though, but for the next Gregorian year, we can just hope for peace and justice and good health. And I'd say my favorite Middle Eastern food is. I guess it's kind of out of left field, but I guess maybe like lamb gyro, which I know is a Turkish cuisine. And I know Jews and Arabs both sort of share like a disdain of Turkey, so maybe we can come together over that. So, yeah.
Do I go or does Rebecca go? Rebecca, you can go ahead.
Okay, sure. Hi, my name is Rebecca. So closing thoughts, I think it is very important to keep having discussions and organically building communities like these and like the one I maintain. And we don't know what we are going to build up together, but if we do spend time together with that kind of a focus, then we will give it a chance to see. And so one thing that I find interesting actually is that in the United States, many of the Jews and many of the Palestinians are basically on the same side of US politics in a very divided country. So we won, but not by such a large margin. And the hope is to be able to keep the Republicans from seizing more power and more control over more branches of government, and further further change the elections in their favor. Biden won by a historic margin, but it only seemed like a narrow victory because of the way the system is set up. So that's a very U.S. political angle. Centrist energy about Israel-Palestine could really galvanize a number of forces around it and be a first step in building up something larger.
Favorite food?
Favorite food? I like labna, and I like baklava. Yeah.
Yeah, for me, I would just say whatever solution. I think we definitely need more localism, 100%, regardless of what happens. I still 100% support the Palestinian right to self-determination, along with the right of return. But the reality is it's going to be one state, I believe, it's heading that way. And so whatever happens, understand the Israeli concerns. I hope one day they come around to understanding ours. I know the ones here seem to understand ours quite well. And so I hope that we can definitely have more localism. I, for example, while I love Jason, I love Iyad, I love Baraj, maybe one day I'll love the rest of you guys. I don't know you that well. I love Adar. I know him quite well. We all want to live in different ways. And so, for example, hopefully in a future peaceful area, I will have my little area where all the men are forced to grow mustaches. In regards to my favorite food, I would say matlube, mansef, one of those two. But Leo is okay, but I don't know about Jews, but Palestinians are prone to be diabetics, so we have to be careful with that aspect.
Yeah, my dad was diabetic, but that's besides the point. So, I'm really happy for this conversation. I think it was really cool. It was really productive. It got a little tense at some points, but I feel like it was in the end pretty nice conversation, and we learned a lot. There's obviously much more to talk, and we obviously aren't going to agree on everything, but it's like everyone else said, it's an important part to have this sort of discussion. And so, I'm looking forward to having a discussion like this again with everyone else and, talking to everyone here. It was really a pleasure. And in terms of food, I'm going to name drop real quick. My family has a restaurant in Williamsburg called Oasis. It's on Bedford, between Bedford and North 7 and North 8. And so we make shawarma and falafel. It's really good stuff. I love shawarma. I'm not a big fan of what we call tabih, the rice dishes. So maklouba, kidra, and stuff like that. They're good. They have their own respectable place in Palestinian culture and cuisine. But I just like the junk food, like the fast food, like falafel, hummus.
Don't forget to shout out the strongman of Ramallah, Ahmed Minsi, the strongman of Ramallah. Don't forget to shout him out.
Strongman of Ramallah, Ahmed Minsi, from Dura Taraf. No one else beside him. And also in Ramallah, if you guys ever end up going to Ramallah, Mr. Baker and Bonjour are really two of the best shawarma places you'll find inside Ramallah. So if you ever get the chance to go there, you'll have fun.
Amazing. Thank you all. I guess I'll share also a final thought. The majority of the people, both Israelis and Palestinians, are quite cynical when it comes to the conflict. They're not hopeful that the conflict can be solved ever. And there's polling to back this up. It's very hard to motivate somebody to act, to progress change, to progress peace when they don't believe they can have an impact. And this, I think, is one of the challenges in activism. We need as many activists as possible. And activist doesn't mean you need to go to a rally and protest. It could just mean reaching out to someone from the other side and getting to know them. So I want to put it out there that although attaining peace seems like one of the greatest challenges we can imagine, every single individual has the ability to impact those around them. So I just want to tell you all, whoever's watching this, we do these conversations weekly, but you can get involved in this process. Reach out to a Palestinian, reach out to an Israeli on social media, message them, tell them you want to get to know them. That is one of the strongest and most impactful forms of activism you could ever imagine. We need millions of people doing this. Imagine if every Israeli had a Palestinian friend and every Palestinian had an Israeli friend. We would change the face of the conflict overnight. So this is something we should all strive to do. This is something we could even do from the comfort of our own homes. So I will leave it with that. When it comes to food, I guess I'll need to give a shout out to hummus, just because it's so good, it's healthy, and it's vegan. It just gets all the categories right. And, just to put it out there, the way you know if a hummus is good or not you could eat it with a fork and not even eat a pita. Or here we do like onion also. But if you could just eat it with a fork, then you know it's good. You can't do it with the store-bought crap you get in the United States. And even the store-bought hummus here, you can't do that with. So hummus that you could eat with the fork, that's the good stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Anyways, we're going to the Discord. The conversation will continue. There's a link in the description. Once you go into Discord, you'll see on the left-hand side, it says lounge. That's where the after party is. You click the lounge. You click once to connect. The second time you click, you'll see whoever else is there with you. So click twice. If you don't want to speak and you just want to type out questions, you'll see right above the lounge there, it says lounge text. That's where you can either ask questions or contribute with writing instead of with voice. And this lasts anywhere from 1 hour to 6 hours. We go wild in the after party. So we'd love to see you all there. With love, friends.
See you later.
See you later.